our first time doing a parts and politics. Yeah, so the idea of are we calling it a show?
A
We're
podcast.
calling it a podcast. The idea of this podcast is that we process the news of the day and we approach everything from a parts perspective. And so we're integrating our knowledge of current events with how that impacts our parts. And yeah, so we process it in front of you all. So I guess that's,
Yeah, it's been inspired by we take our walks every day, and we actually just got back from our walk, which is why our hair is a little damp because it's raining. And on our walks, we talk about all kinds of things, but one of the things that we always talk about are current events and how our parts are feeling. And for probably a few years, I've said, oh, we should make a podcast about this so that other people can process their parts as pertain to politics. So we're just inviting you into our process. It's going to be very casual, and we're just going to talk about what's coming up for us. And so we did not prepare for this at all, which is what we wanted. We wanted it to feel very raw and unfiltered and unedited. The only thing we prepared is I said, well, I feel like the biggest thing going on right now politically is the war in Iran. And just so you know, if you've watched any of our other videos that were from several years ago, during the which election? 2020. During the 2020 election, I think is when we made a bunch of videos. Um, we're Tom and I are both very smart people, I'm happy to say, but in very different ways. And so politics has never been my jam in terms of understanding things on a global or systemic level. So I've gotten really involved in politics and advocacy because I think we can't stick our heads in the sand. And I think both of us really feel like as white, straight, cisgendered people with a whole lot of privilege that it's really important for us to stay involved in politics. It's really important for us to stay aware and educated and informed and advocating and being activists and protesting and raising awareness and donating and doing all of those things that we can do with our privilege. But we just think really differently about things. I'm a much more micro thinker. I think a lot about relationships. I'm an Enneagram 2, and they say that for twos, 80% of our thoughts are about other people. And I would say that's true for me. And also, I'm a therapist, so spend a lot of time thinking just about individual people. But Tom has a background in law, and he is a very big picture thinker. And I always appreciate the perspective that he brings to politics. So when something happens, like a war, I think a lot about how it impacts people I know and how it impacts people I don't know, but as individuals, like people living in places, what it must be like for them and the fear that they feel and the trauma that they're experiencing. But I don't think or know a lot about on the global scale. So we wanted to talk about both
yeah.
micro and macro.
So let's jump into it.
Well, let's jump into it. First of all, I have no real idea what's happening other than the headlines, which I read. So maybe you could tell us beyond the headlines what is happening.
Yeah, so we've been at war at the time of recording with Iran for a couple of days now.
It's
And
March 5th, March 5th, 2026.
yeah, and basically, the United States is demolishing the Iranian military and political structures, and obviously causing civilian casualties as well. As of today, 6 American service members have died. And yeah, why? Normally there's a why that I can give, like, oh, systemically, historically, these are the reasons why we're there. But honestly, I have no fucking idea. Why we are fighting a war in Iran, other than like the Epstein files as
Mhm.
a distraction.
Mhm. Well, let's pick up there then. I mean, we don't know. We're not political operatives, but certainly the Epstein files is something that we both have been following very closely. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse, and I'm a therapist for people who've been sexually abused and trafficked. And so for me, it's been very, very personal. And then for Tom, I think as, the most important person in his life is taking it very personally. It's been personal for you as well. And I know that is an idea that's been floated and I've reposted things about that. And it makes sense to me that this could be a distraction from that. But I don't know. I've also seen people post the opposite. And I guess those are the kinds of conversations I want to have because, like, I don't really want to just trust what people post on social media. So, like, what's the devil's advocate argument for, like, is there a devil's advocate argument for, so, like, similar, maybe, like, I'll just share what I've heard as a civilian is, that the Iranian dictator did need to be removed. The Iranians are very happy about that, similar to what happened in Venezuela. Is there an argument to be made for that?
I think there's always reason to celebrate when authoritarian governments fall, but it's always like a cautious celebration of what happens afterwards. And it seems that when governments fall either through a coup or being overthrown by a foreign military power, like those are the most destabilizing ways for a government to fall. And, you know, in terms of what's happened in Venezuela, if we're just taking that as precedent, it's kind of eerily similar. Like our premier military is just being a bully and like totally knocking out these, lesser militaries. I think there is some kind of like masculine gratification to that. And then we're like, there's a post hoc justification of like, oh, Maduro was a dictator, and that's why he had to go. But it's always funny how we get involved whenever it's a dictator of a country that has oil. Like we're not involved in like Saudi Arabia or Qatar, like all these other neighboring countries to Iran.
They don't have oil?
No, they do have oil.
Oh,
But I mean, they're allied with us. But like,
oh,
it's not the authoritarianism that's the problem. It's that they are
oh.
opposed to us, globally, and they have oil.
I think I do need a little bit more clarification on that. So, like, Saudi Arabia and Qatar are our allies.
Yes.
Okay. And so they have oil, as do lots of other countries. But if they are our ally and have oil, we don't try to overthrow their dictator. But if they have a dictator and are not our ally and have oil, so, like, is there a country, I guess, that has a dictator and no oil that we're not interested in?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking mostly of like Russia and Korea. Of like, technically, Russia does have oil, but it doesn't make sense for us to like take over Russia to take over their oil. Like, it's a huge undertaking to like take on Russia. But like, if we were principled, we would have been sending these resources to the Ukrainians to fight for their freedom. Like there's a very obvious fight for freedom in the world. And why we're choosing, these dictators that are easy to overthrow, but like not easy to replace.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't have a devil's advocate argument of like why that's strategic.
Hmm.
It's very unstrategic. The most I can say is that it's the masculine vibes of like beating up a smaller foe feels gratifying. And like, I'm not sure what else. There's like the white supremacy part of it too, of like, we get involved in countries that are predominantly non-white.
So, talking about Venezuela makes me think about when that happened. I don't have any friends that I'm aware of that are Iranian, but I did have friends that are Venezuelan. And so I asked them, what they thought about it. And they were very honest that they were really torn, that they were really celebrating, that it felt not safer actually, because it felt really scary, the like retaliatory things that were happening, but it felt really good, to not have somebody who'd caused so much harm be actively in power. And also, they are not supporters of our current government or of Trump's regime. And so they weren't happy about that piece. And I think that kind of opens the doorway into thinking about how we can have different parts that feel different ways about things like this. Like Iranians maybe have parts that are rejoicing and are glad, and also maybe have parts that are concerned about how this happened and what it might mean next. And I think we as Americans can have that too. We can have parts that, feel glad that a dictator is gone and extremely worried about what that means for the world. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I think that's right of being able to sit with both of those feelings at the same time and not having to like just choose one emotion, I think that is the healthy way to approach your parts and, the emotions that internationals bring about in us.
So what have your parts been feeling about this war?
Um, my parts feel despair. Um, and part of it is obviously, I'm almost 40. Like I was coming of age when we invaded Iraq, and I have brothers that served in the military,
And do still serve.
do still serve, and they haven't been in any active combat zones, but yeah, but I feel for the sacrifice that military service members and their families make. And when we go on these wars, there's a huge cost to the people that serve, in terms of like PTSD. Like we look at their outcomes of like homelessness and drug use and reckless behavior that is near suicidal. Like these are things that happen to really good people. And it's a choice that we make to send them on these expeditions to like, you know, play in our sandbox of global politics. Like it's a kind of reckless way to view human life and the sacrifice that people sign up for, allegedly for patriotism, but we're using it in the service of imperialism. So the fact that we have not learned from a war that is not like just it's 20 years old and like we should still remember that precedent. But it's not even really brought up, which is crazy. It's like to me, it's like people forgetting that 9/11 happened.
Hmm.
Like,
I've seen people bring it up on social media. I saw a meme that I appreciated that was like, the year is 2001. The dumbest president that we've ever had is sending people to fight the dumbest war that we've ever had. And then it's like, the year is 2026. I was wrong. There's a dumber president who is sending people for a dumber war.
yes, that's
I mean, I'm not laughing at the reality, but the meme was funny. If we
yeah.
didn't have memes, we wouldn't survive.
Yes, I will ascribe to that.
He'll co-sign.
Yes. Um, how are your parts feeling about the fact that we're in another war this
Well,
year?
I'll answer that question, but I have a follow-up for you first.
Okay.
So you said your parts are despairing, and you talked about like the cost to the United States service members. But just knowing you, I think your despair is probably much bigger than that. Like you tend to have more than me, which is part of why I wanted to do this podcast. Because again, I think we have very different reactions to things. You tend to have a lot more existential despair than I do. So how's that been?
Yeah, I think the part that is probably newly activated for me is like the current administration is fundamentally authoritarian in its approach to like everything. And it's one thing if it's kind of like focused internally on, us, the opposition, and I can feel like, oh, at least it's contained to our borders. But when we start going on these imperial expeditions and overthrowing other countries, like our dysfunction and our cultural diseases are being spread across the globe. Um, and it is just, it's not actually new. It's, the continuation of the white supremacist colonial worldviews that say that like we are like this super blessed nation that needs to tell others how to live.
Yeah, I love to read fiction, and I read a lot of fiction set in colonial England, not colonial United States, but like that time. I just finished Philippa Gregory's Tidelands series, which is set during the Revolutionary War in the United States as well as in England and in Barbados a little bit. And so it's a lot about colonialism. And I think reading fiction is so valuable because you're never going to get me to read a nonfiction book about
Yeah.
colonization by England during the Revolutionary War period and around those several hundred years, the British Empire. But I'll happily read a trilogy, a very long trilogy, like 1,000-page books each about that, and, feel emotions about what happened under colonization and, as you said, is still happening. We are personally, you and I, uh, why can't I think of the word that's not ancestors? We're
Descendants.
the descendants. Thank you. We're the descendants of people who colonized. Well, actually, my descendants were colonized, the Irish, but I digress. And you have a lot of Irish ancestry too. So I guess actually both of us technically, our actual ancestors were the colonized by England. But, I'm sure we've got some English blood in there. How can you not? And, at the very least, we are benefiting from colonization. The house that we live in, which was built in the 1700s during the colonization of the United States, the land that we live on that was taken from the Lenape people. We are, I mean, I'm like looking outside at the river and the woods out through the window, and this is colonized land.
Yeah. And to like call out fellow Irish Americans, like as a demographic, our ancestors were oppressed by the English. And when we first came to the Americas, like the immigrants just off the boat were funding like the resistance, the Irish resistance to England. And they kept that revolutionary spirit and resistance. And I just lament that it didn't take long for us who have come here to become English ourselves, to join the power structure on the side of the oppressors. And not that like Irish falls predominantly, liberal or conservative, but I do think there is so many of us who have become disconnected to that part of our heritage. And I think it is just a tragedy that so many of us have become the English.
Actually, it was exactly this week last year that we were in Ireland, connecting with our Irish ancestors and learning a lot about that. So maybe that's another episode. But to answer your question about my parts, as I think all parts do, or all systems do, and if you don't know what we're talking about our internal family system. So the parts of ourselves that develop to help us cope with maybe childhood trauma or other things. And that's not their only role, but they have all kinds of jobs. And so I notice a lot of different reactions inside of me to all political events. There's never just like one, excuse me, overarching thing. And so a big one for me, which I don't think you'll be surprised by, are my distractor parts, that kind of, they get invested in like finding funny memes about the situation or like posting on social media, like informative videos, which are, great things. They're good, good awareness spreading, but are also a real distraction from, I think, like, deep feelings. And I think the deep feelings, like when I ask those distractor parts to move aside, that there's a lot of fear, and underneath fear is grief. You know, we all just want to have happy lives, us, the people in Iran, the people in Venezuela, like all of us just want to have happy lives, and that there's some dictator out there, I mean, the dictator of our own country, the United States of America, making these frankly insane decisions that can prevent us from having happy lives. Is well, it's also a lot of anger comes up. I feel infuriated. I feel sad. I feel scared. And I think no wonder I have, and I think a lot of other people have distractor parts that try to just, focus on, well, what's the meme I can post in this situation? What's the reel I can share? Because I think for all of us, we are so overwhelmed by how our parts are activated over and over again. It's a meme, but it's true that every day there is breaking news. Every day there is some horrific headline that once upon a time, I mean, really, I don't think this is rose-colored glasses. Once upon a time, the kind of breaking news headlines that we deal with now would have been scarce. And instead, and we know this is part of the strategy, right? But the fact that our parts have to reactivate every day when something new happens, new fear, new anger, new sadness, and of course, lots of new distraction techniques. It's a lot. It's a lot. And that's why we go for our walk every day, because I don't think we could survive without our little mental health walk.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I do feel like the walking and the discharge kind of helps our parts deal with all the stuff that we distract ourselves from.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think one other part that kind of comes up in these news cycles is the feelings of like disconnection of people who, you count as like friends or family
Mm.
who you think care about you, but also seem so indifferent to the reality that you experience. And
It's a big one.
it is, yeah, that's a big one for me. And yeah, I don't really have like a great answer for that other than just acknowledge that that exists and that's how we feel. And it makes sense that so many of us are disconnected from people who just refuse to acknowledge the reality and the danger that you live with every day.
Yeah, I mean, not to like wrap this up in some kind of neat bow, because it certainly can't be, but I do think one thing for you to cope with that has been going back to therapy.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
Is that something you want to speak to at all in our last couple minutes?
Um, yeah, so I've been going back to therapy. I did take a little break, but it has been very, very helpful. And I think for me, like, it is important to have someone other than your spouse who can help carry some of the emotional burden that you have. Because that's not a fair expectation to have on any one person to hold all of your emotional needs. Um, and so, yeah, going back to therapy has kind of given me a really healthy outlet to kind of process my feelings so that it's not all being dumped on charity to support me.
Well, you support it right back. I think we both hold a lot of space for each other, but I totally agree. I mean, I didn't stop therapy, so I'm just continuing along. I'm not blaming you for stopping therapy. I think it's a great idea to stop therapy sometimes, and it's a great idea to restart it sometimes. But yeah, I think for both of us, having somebody to hold space, exactly what you said. So we're not the only person taking that in. I think it's important.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's our parts and politics exploration for today, actually, because we have to go to a podcast interview
Yeah.
about a totally unrelated topic. So
Talking
we're
about
gonna,
our new book.
our book, How to Understand and Deal with ADHD, coming to you August 2026.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, folks.
Bye.